The signs are undeniable. Rising debt, global tensions, and economic fractures. The foundations of America's power are under pressure. Today, economists, investors, and even America's closest allies are asking the same question: is the world's most powerful empire beginning to collapse? For over a century, the United States has stood as the world's dominant force, economically, militarily, and culturally. The US dollar backs global trade, American companies shape technology, and its military presence extends across the planet. But no empire holds the top spot forever. The cracks often start small: economic pressure, global rivals, political divisions, until the entire foundation shifts. In this investigation, we uncover the economic warnings, structural weaknesses, and global shifts that could determine the future of the United States and reshape the world order. Welcome to Empire Secrets. For decades, the United States built its empire on a unique advantage: the ability to borrow, spend, and invest with little immediate consequence. The world trusted the US dollar. Global markets accepted American debt as the safest asset on Earth. That system fueled the country's growth, its military expansion, and its economic dominance. But today, the numbers are sounding alarms that even Wall Street can't ignore. The US national debt now exceeds $35 trillion, a figure growing by nearly $1 trillion every 100 days. By historical standards, no empire has carried this level of debt and remained dominant indefinitely. In 2023 alone, the US government spent over $659 billion on interest payments, money that produced no infrastructure, no healthcare, no innovation, only the cost of maintaining existing debt. If current trends continue, the interest expenses will surpass $1 trillion annually by 2026, more than the US spends on defense, education, or social services. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about confidence. America's economic model relies on trust that the US dollar will remain the world's reserve currency. Trust that US Treasury bonds are the safest investment. Trust that the system remains stable. Still, in 2023, the US hit its statutory debt ceiling, triggering political standoffs that rattled global markets. The mere possibility of a US default, even temporary, sent shockwaves through the financial system, illustrating how fragile confidence has become. It's no longer a question of whether America can borrow, it's whether the world will keep believing in the promise that debt equals strength. When trust in an empire's financial system breaks down, decline tends to follow. In the 20th century, the British Empire experienced a similar trajectory. Post-World War II, mounting debt, military overextension, and economic stagnation weakened its power, and within decades, Britain's global influence had contracted dramatically. Today, some economists draw unsettling parallels between the US and Britain's decline. The difference? America's debt is magnitudes larger, its financial systems are more complex, and the stakes are far higher. Already, major global players from China to Saudi Arabia are diversifying away from US debt. Central banks worldwide are reducing their exposure to US treasuries, signaling that even America's closest economic allies are preparing for uncertainty. If confidence in the US debt weakens further, the consequences could be profound: higher borrowing costs, market instability, and the slow erosion of the financial dominance that's upheld America's global empire for generations. Empires fall when they can no longer finance their ambitions, when debt becomes a burden, not a tool. The numbers suggest that that moment is approaching faster than most are willing to admit. For nearly 8 decades, the foundations of America's global power hasn't just been its military or its economy, it's been the US dollar. Today, over 58% of the world's foreign currency reserves are held in dollars. Nearly 90% of global trade is conducted in dollars at some stage. From oil transactions in the Middle East to corporate financing in Europe, The dollar is everywhere, but behind the headlines, cracks are forming in this dominance. Earlier this year, China and Brazil finalized a historic agreement to trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. Similar moves are unfolding across the Gulf states and Southeast Asia, signaling a slow, strategic retreat from dollar dependence. Empires rarely lose control overnight, but when global trade stops flowing through your currency, influence fades quietly. Then suddenly, nations once fully dependent on the US financial system are quietly building alternatives. China, the world's second largest economy, has signed dozens of bilateral trade agreements bypassing the dollar entirely, using yuan, euro, or local currencies for oil, energy, and technology deals. Russia, after facing unprecedented financial sanctions, accelerated the de-dollarization of its economy, cutting dollar reserves, expanding gold holdings, and transacting with allies outside US financial channels. BRICS nations, representing over 40% of the global population, are exploring the creation of a shared currency aimed at reducing reliance on the dollar. Even American allies like France, India, and Brazil have begun conducting major energy deals without using US currency. These developments may seem isolated, but the collapse of past superpowers suggests otherwise. In the early 20th century, the British pound served the same role the dollar holds today, the backbone of global trade. But as Britain's empire weakened, so did the pound's dominance. It took just 2 global conflicts and an economic downturn for the pound to lose its status, and Britain to lose much of its global influence. For the US, the dollar's supremacy allows extraordinary privileges, borrowing at low rates, financing massive deficits, and projecting economic power across borders. But when global trust shifts, when nations no longer need dollars, that leverage disappears. Already, central banks worldwide have reduced their dollar reserves to their lowest levels in 25 years. Gold purchases are rising. Alternative payment systems like China's CIPS and Russia's SPFs are expanding, designed specifically to reduce exposure to US financial control. If these trends accelerate, America faces a future where the dollar no longer guarantees power, where global trade, investment, and influence flow through competing currencies and rival systems. The fall of an empire often starts when the currency behind it weakens. The question is no longer whether alternatives exist, it's how quickly they gain ground, and how prepared America is for a world that may no longer run on dollars. Every empire builds its dominance not just through currency or military strength, but through control of production. For much of the 20th century, the United States was the world's manufacturing powerhouse. From automobiles to steel, electronics to aerospace, Made in America symbolized global industrial dominance. But today that foundation is eroding, and with it, a critical pillar of American power. Since the late 1990s, US manufacturing as a share of GDP has declined significantly. Over 70,000 factories have closed across the country, with millions of industrial jobs outsourced to cheaper markets in Asia, Mexico, and Eastern Europe. China, in particular, has risen to fill the void. Today, China produces nearly 30% of the world's manufactured goods, while the US lags behind at just over 16%. In critical industries, from semiconductors to renewable energy components, American production is dangerously dependent on foreign suppliers. This dependence isn't just an economic risk, it's a strategic vulnerability. The 2021 global chip shortage exposed this vulnerability on live television, as automakers like Ford and General Motors halted production lines, not from lack of demand, but from missing microchips largely produced in Taiwan. A superpower can build armies, but if it can't build the technology to run them, the illusion of control fades fast. The majority of advanced semiconductors, essential for everything from smartphones to military defense systems, are produced in Taiwan, a region fraught with geopolitical tension. Meanwhile, rare earth minerals, critical for technology, defense, and energy, are overwhelmingly controlled by China, leaving American industries exposed to supply disruptions and economic leverage. One thing is clear: when empires lose control of production, they lose control of their destiny. In the 19th century, Britain's Industrial Revolution made it the global leader in trade and technology. But as its manufacturing base stagnated and global rivals started to catch up, British economic influence waned, contributing to the slow unraveling of its empire. Now, familiar warning signs are emerging in the United States. Despite efforts to reshore production and invest in domestic industry, the structural decline in manufacturing capacity leaves gaps that competitors like China, India, and the European Union are eager to exploit. As America imports more goods than it produces, runs persistent trade deficits, and relies on global rivals for critical materials, this illusion of economic self-sufficiency fades. And without industrial strength, even the most powerful currency or military becomes vulnerable. The fall of a superpower doesn't always start at the borders. Often it starts from within. Throughout history, the greatest threats to dominant powers have come not from foreign armies, but from internal fractures, inequality, political gridlock, and social unrest. Today, those same patterns are emerging across the United States. Economic inequality in America has reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age. The top 1% of Americans now control more wealth than the entire bottom 90% combined. Median wages have stagnated for decades, even as corporate profits and stock markets soar. For millions, the promise of the American dream, upward mobility, home ownership, financial security, feels increasingly out of reach. But inequality alone doesn't dismantle empires. It's the erosion of social trust that accelerates decline. In 2020, over 26 million Americans participated in protests, the largest movement in US history, revealing deep fractures over justice, economics, and national identity, and political divisions have only widened since. When the streets grow louder than the halls of power, instability often follows. Surveys reveal a consistent trend. Trust in government, media, corporations, and even democracy itself is falling. Political polarization has reached extremes, with legislative gridlock and social discourse more fractured than any point in modern US history. The result? A society divided not just by ideology, but by opportunity, geography, and identity. In ancient Rome, economic disparity and political corruption hollowed out institutions long before the empire's borders crumbled. In pre-revolutionary France, extreme wealth concentration fueled instability that reshaped Europe. More recently, the Soviet Union collapsed under the weight of economic mismanagement and internal disillusionment, not external invasion. The parallels to modern America are uncomfortable, from protests to rising crime, from political extremism to cultural fragmentation. The signs of internal strain are multiplying. And while the US remains a global superpower on paper, its domestic cohesion is under pressure. Empires project strength abroad, but when unity collapses at home, influence inevitably follows. The world is watching, investors, competitors, and allies alike, as America navigates this period of division. No empire collapses purely from external forces. The seeds of decline are often planted at home, and in the United States, those seeds are beginning to grow. For much of modern history, America's military has been the backbone of its global empire. With 750 military bases across more than 80 countries, the US operates the most extensive defense network the world has ever seen. From Europe to Asia, the Middle East to the Pacific, American forces project power, secure trade routes, and uphold geopolitical influence. But maintaining that dominance comes at an extraordinary cost. In 2024, the US defense spending surpassed $880 billion, accounting for more than 37% of all global military expenditure. That's more than the next 10 countries combined, including rivals like China and Russia. Yet despite this spending, cracks are forming in the military foundation. The chaotic 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan wasn't just a tactical failure, it symbolized how even vast military budgets can't guarantee global stability. After 2 decades, trillions spent and thousands of lives lost, the Taliban returned to power in days. You can project power across oceans, but if the ground beneath your empire shifts, the entire structure weakens. The past offers clear warnings. The Roman Empire at its peak maintained vast military outposts to secure its borders, but the financial burden drained resources, eroded public support, and weakened the empire from within. Britain, during its imperial zenith, policed global trade routes and colonies across continents, but after 2 world wars and economic strain, its global military presence collapsed. Today, America faces a similar dilemma. Rising debt, domestic divisions, and global rivals challenge the sustainability of endless military commitments. Defense analysts warn that maintaining such a vast footprint strains not just budgets, but readiness, morale, and long-term strategic focus. At the same time, new forms of warfare, cyber attacks, economic sanctions, technological disruption, diminish the effectiveness of traditional military dominance. China, for example, invests heavily in anti-access weapons, cyber capabilities, and economic leverage designed to erode US influence without direct conflict. Other nations adopt asymmetric strategies, exploiting weaknesses, bypassing conventional military superiority. The danger is clear. When empires stretch beyond their capacity, economically, militarily, and politically, decline accelerates. America's military remains formidable, but power isn't measured by size alone. It's measured by sustainability, adaptability, and public support. And as global challenges multiply, the cost of policing the world could become the very force that weakens the empire it was designed to protect. Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen on the back of innovation. Technological superiority isn't just a competitive advantage, it's the foundation of economic growth, military power, and global influence. For decades, the United States has led the world in this arena. From the microchip to the internet, Silicon Valley's breakthroughs have driven American dominance in finance, defense, and consumer markets. Today, US companies still control many of the world's largest tech platforms: Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon. But the race is far from over, and for the first time in a century, the US faces serious competition. China, in particular, has launched a direct challenge to American technological leadership. Throughout massive state investments, strategic partnership, and global expansion, China now leads in critical industries. 5G infrastructure, where Chinese firm Huawei dominates global markets. Electric vehicles, with China controlling over 60% of EV battery production. Rare earth minerals essential for electronics, defense, and renewable energy, where China controls more than 80% of processing capacity. Artificial intelligence, where Chinese companies and research institutions are rapidly closing the gap, with Beijing investing billions in AI development. In 2022, China overtook the US in 5G infrastructure deployment, with over 2 million 5G base stations nationwide. Meanwhile, the US struggles with fragmented networks and reliance on foreign hardware. The future belongs to those who control the next wave of innovation, and for the first time in decades, America's lead is no longer guaranteed. Meanwhile, US tech giants face internal headwinds. Regulatory crackdowns, antitrust lawsuits, and data privacy concerns limit expansion. Semiconductor production remains heavily reliant on fragile global supply chains, with Taiwan producing over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, a dangerous dependency given rising tensions in the Pacific. The risk is clear. If America loses its technological edge, its economic and military dominance erodes in tandem. The past provides a sobering precedent. In the early 20th century, Britain led the world in naval power, finance, and industrial production. But as rivals like Germany and the US advanced technologically, Britain's global influence diminished. The United States now faces a similar crossroads. While American innovation remains strong, complacency is not an option. The tech race is no longer about gadgets, it's about national security, economic stability, and the architecture of global power. Empires decline when they fall behind in innovation, when rivals dictate the next industrial revolution, and the old superpower becomes dependent on foreign breakthroughs. The challenge for America is clear: adapt, invest, and innovate, or risk watching the next chapter of global dominance unfold without it. Empires don't fall in isolation. Their decline reshapes the world. For over a century, the United States has set the rules of global trade, finance, technology, and defense. The dollar, the internet, the military alliances, all designed to uphold American influence. But as the cracks in the US foundation deepen, debt, social division, industrial decline, military strain, other powers are quietly positioning themselves to fill the void. China leads that race. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road, China has invested over $1 trillion into infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Europe, building ports, railways, and digital networks that expand its global footprint. Russia, though economically smaller, leverages energy exports, military influence, and diplomatic alliances to challenge US dominance, particularly in regions like the Middle East and Eastern Europe. India, with its massive population and growing tech sector, is emerging as a wild card, balancing relations with both East and West while advancing in its own global ambitions. Meanwhile, the European Union, despite internal divisions, represents a powerful bloc in finance, regulation, and innovation, capable of influencing global standards independent of Washington. And beyond state actors, global corporations, tech giants, and decentralized technologies like cryptocurrencies are reshaping power structures, often beyond the reach of traditional governments. At the 2023 BRICS summit, member nations discussed expanding their bloc, representing a combined GDP surpassing the G7 in purchasing power terms, signaling a historic shift in economic influence away from the traditional Western order. Power rarely disappears, it migrates, and those watching the global chessboard know the pieces are already moving. The question is not whether a global power shift is coming, it's how rapidly it unfolds and who capitalizes on America's vulnerabilities. The collapse of previous empires shows the consequences. After the decline of the Roman Empire, Europe fractured, power redistributed to emerging kingdoms, trade networks, and competing systems. When Britain's empire contracted, the United States, Soviet Union, and new economic centers rose to prominence. Today, similar patterns emerge. As America faces structural weaknesses, economic, political, and social, the world adjusts, alliances shift, trade routes evolve, financial systems diversify. And while the US remains a superpower, the notion of uncontested American dominance is fading. The fall of an empire isn't always a dramatic collapse. Sometimes it's a quiet redistribution of power, influence, and opportunity. Those prepared for that shift, nations, corporations, investors, will shape the next global chapter. History rarely repeats itself, but the patterns tend to rhyme. Every empire, from Rome to Britain, believed its power was permanent until the evidence suggested otherwise. Unsustainable debt, overreach, internal division, technological stagnation, shifting global alliances. Today, those same patterns are visible across the United States. The cracks may be subtle: a debt burden spiraling out of control, industries hollowed out, allies questioning the system, rivals rising quietly. But no empire collapses overnight. Decline is a process, slow, often unnoticed, until it accelerates beyond control. The question facing America is not whether the challenges exist, it's whether the country can adapt before the foundation erodes. The signs are there, in boardrooms, trading floors, geopolitical negotiations, and economic forecasts. Those paying attention understand. Power doesn't vanish, it transfers. And as the global order evolves, one truth remains: empires rise and empires fall. The only certainty is change. This was Empire Secrets. Subscribe now for more untold stories behind the world's biggest giants. Your desire, your empire.